Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're here with Anne-Virginie, the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Sciences from Bluebird Bio. Anne, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here at this fantastic conference at the DIA. So I'm Anne-Virginie Eggimann. I lead the regulatory group at Bluebird Bio. We're a biotech company focused on the development of gene therapy products for severe genetic diseases, as well as for oncology. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm very excited to be here.
That's great. Yeah, we're excited to talk to you today and learn a little bit more about the work that Bluebird's doing in the area of gene therapy. So with that, gene therapy has been very effective in cancer and treating other rare diseases. So what other areas would you think that gene therapy would be really good to target, and what has Bluebird been working on?
So I would say in general, I think there are going to be multiple areas where gene therapy is going to develop. I'm thinking of ophthalmology and ultra-rare diseases are areas where I think gene therapy will really evolve and make a big difference. But I think it's not limited. I think you can think of any liver-based disease, CNS area. But in general, I think oncology and genetic diseases are sort of the big buckets. And in terms of some of the things we're working on, we're looking at increasing our portfolio in oncology, but I'm spending a fair amount of my time right now thinking about ultra-rare diseases. And as you can imagine, it creates specific challenges in terms of how you're going to develop products where you have very few patients. So trying to be creative on the regulatory side about how do you partner with the regulators to have a streamlined development that will still meet all the standards, and then perhaps do additional follow-up post-approval and have more post-approval commitments to be able to satisfy their requirements, but perhaps streamline the early development for these ultra-rare diseases.
Yeah, so that is definitely really important, and I think there is, I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on the regulatory gaps between developing these technologies and how to get those into the clinic and into for patients.
Yeah, so when you think of regulatory science and science in general, I think there's always a little bit of a gap, and regulators have been excellent at learning from companies on the evolving science, and they're very eager to learn. So that synergy is really happening, and it's really great to see. I think where there's still a little bit of a gap is on the manufacturing, in part because companies are still learning themselves on how to improve and standardize some of the manufacturing, and I think the regulators are still trying to figure out if we're able to accelerate the clinical development, how do we accelerate the CMC and manufacturing development from a regulatory standpoint? And it's not easy, but one of the things that we're considering is having these discussions early with the regulators about some of the milestones that you need to reach, including in manufacturing, and what are some of the things that we can dialogue early on so that if there are issues, we can also discuss them quickly and resolve them quickly. But this is an evolving dialogue, and there's still a lot to do there.
Thank you. Yeah, and so with the focus on the regulatory process leading up to and including product approval, how will systems adapt to gene therapy products in the conduct of post-market regulatory science?
So I think it's an excellent question. As you know, for gene therapy products, patients have to be followed long-term, so 10 or 15 years post-approval. So that evidence generation will continue. And I think a critical component of capturing that information is going to be real-world evidence science and regulatory engagement on how to optimize the capture of that information. There are many ways to do this, through registries, through the collection of claims data, through relationships with big hospitals, healthcare centers. And I think the science around big data and digital management of health records is just starting to grow. And I think there you will see a lot of a lot of progress, I think, in the coming years to optimize that. And I think that will give a lot of confidence to the field and to regulators to approve these products early, because they'll know that they will continue to have really good quality data post-approval. So I think this is an area where that will be really evolving in the coming years.
With incorporating RWE and gene therapy, it's really important to maintain that open communication with regulators. But how do you see the regulators, or what is needed from the regulatory point of view to keep the sponsor up to date when they're doing all this, when it's a rapidly evolving field and there's all these new technologies, resources, et cetera, that are being used?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, I think, is the partnership between patients' organizations, the regulators, and the sponsors, and setting up these registries where all parties get the information that they need, I think will be critical. And your question about how do you keep each other up to date, I think it's through these partnerships and these perhaps frequent interactions post-approval, especially right after the approval, to really set the stage for how you're going to collect that information. What information are you collecting? Is it satisfying the patient organization as well as the regulators and the physicians? How do we make that feasible so that it's not too cumbersome? So it's a lot of dialogue, I think, up front. And then once that's set up, I think then it's continuing that partnership and that dialogue. And I think, the DIA, for example, is a great place where I think a lot of people share their best thinking on real world evidence and how to capture this data. So I think all these things together are going to go a long way. But regulators do have to share, right, their best thinking, because they learn from all the sponsors. And I think they're quite good at that, right? And so publishing guidances or presentations where they share their thinking. So I would definitely encourage the continuation of that dialogue.
So thank you so much, Anne-Virginie.
Sure.
And thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.